I'm an architect, and how I started this project was that my education, I did my bachelor's in Peru. My education in architecture was okay, but I ended up being very depressed and sick of architecture. And then I decided to do my master's after 3 or 4 years of working there, to do it in somewhere else, to see other things. And I decided to come to Brussels to study. But when I did that decision was that I was only gonna do architecture in relation to things that I was very interested in. So only my ideas, everything that I wanted, and I found actually a good opportunity in Brussels to do it. So, and then I wondered, what do I know that I can actually create some kind of impact or spend time that I can be interested in actually spending hours in something that I am close to. And then I realized, okay, I'm in Europe. Yeah, what do I know? I know about being a gay person, I guess. And then I decided to do that, to research actually my queerness in relation to space, that it's something also I'm supposed to know, because I studied architecture for 7 years in Peru, and 2 years more in Belgium. So I decided to combine this kind of spatial, intellectual capacity or knowledge, and then my own experience. And that's how this project called Queer Commons started for my master's thesis, called Queer Commons. And then, yeah, I started reviewing on these concepts of queerness, commons, and space, and the relation between them, and just to explain it, or not to explain, but just to say some ideas of these three concepts. It's like queerness, of course, is. I should start with commons. Commons is this concept used for communal spaces that are always, in my understanding, related to a certain group of people or a certain community in a space. So, for me, the question of being an LGBTQ or queer people called a community, then I wonder, there must exist some kind of commons also in our community, and then I started to have that in mind. And then, of course, space, this physical representation of space, but also I try to expand this understanding of space to more than only physical, to virtual or imagined, etc. And queerness is very difficult because there are so many definitions of queerness, and in a way it's interesting that there are so many, because it allows me, or it allows everyone actually, to use a different one depending on to who we are talking to. So and I think I've passed through different stages also of definition of that concept, and the one I really like, and it's lasting the longest, is actually not a definition of queerness, but it's a definition of lesbianism by Ochi Curiel, who's a feminist theorist from Dominican Republic, and she describes lesbianism as a political position, philosophical and political position that gives balance to the heteropatriarchal world. So I think queerness is actually that. We try, or queerness thinking and queerness bodies try to give also balance to this homogeneous society that is in power. But how this started, of course, this researching on queer theory, with the fact that our bodies are the instrument of control of society, actually. And yeah, Foucault was one of the first things I started to research when questioning this concept of control in relation to the body. But the idea is that in Foucault I was focusing on the power relation to the body, how the body is actually the instrument where the power is put on. And with Judith Butler was this, yes, our bodies are categorized into certain identities or certain words, identities, and one of, specifically I was interested, or the queer theory relates to this difference between our bodies, our desires, and our identities, and none of them corresponds to any of them, but actually it's just aleatory combinations. So that was I was interested in, and that was kind of my basis for my research. And of course, if you think about commons or the physical representation of queerness, then you, or at least I, had this first image of gay streets in the whole world, you know, which is everywhere. They exist, well, not everywhere, most in the global north, in cities of the global north. But for me, this approximation was actually not inclusive enough, because for me it's like Disneyland for gays, or mainly gay men. And I didn't think it was inclusive enough, so I started by actually having these first thoughts. I decided not to focus on physical space as a point of research, but extend this understanding of space. And as I said, yeah, these spaces are capitalistic representations of queerness that creates other impacts in the city, such as gentrification and displacement of original businesses that started these areas of the city. And of course, if you Google or you try to look for spatial representation in terms of maps, for example, of queerness, you'll find these commercial maps of gay Paris or gay Brussels, and it's all of the businesses, actually bars, hotels, restaurants, that are gay friendly. And so for me, again, it was this question: what is queer common? Like, what is these commons that queer people share that is not necessarily specific about the city, but it's more about a queer experience and a queer, maybe not identity, but experience. And again, you know, as an architect, I started researching on, again, the representation of the city and how modernism, for example, with a very specific way of doing architecture, or also designing architecture, which is a top view. An architect is always drawing from the top view, designing how people move, how people should inhabit their spaces, in contrast to this kind of alternative or a more research of the city based on experience, for example, or perception. And that was also my interest, and I found this project very interesting, Queering the Map, which actually maps or allows people to put their experience in a whole map of the world. It's like Google Maps, but where you can write some experience you have in any space in the world. So I found this kind of map or performatic action of putting experience also interesting that relate to what I wanted to do. And again, what is queerness? I think it's also, architecture is so much based in precision, you know. We of course need plans that have to be precise, but I think queerness is the thing that is in between this ideal of precision. So if you have here 3 rules in different materials, they all should be 1 meter, but they're not 1 meter, they're not all of them the same size. So I think this kind of idea of precision that we architects and the whole world has is just an illusion, and actually everything is queer, you know. And from all of these reflections of my things I visit, theories I read, thoughts I had, references I had in my life that also affected my research, I decided, or I create some kind of theory also that I call the queer spheres, or the 3 queer spheres. So what do we really share? What are the commons of queer people? So in order to analyze what we queer people share, I decided not to focus on space, but to focus on experience. You know, experience, our body, in relation to space. So I divide it into 3 categories that actually are metaphors of not coming out, but realizing we are queer in this world, or being queer in this world. So the first stage, queer people at some moment of their lives realize they're different because maybe 99% of the world is heteropatriarchal, heteronormative. So queer people has to realize that we are different. And that moment of, shock or realization happens in a space, and it's shared not only for for queer people in Brussels or in Paris, but actually queer people in Peru go through that same process, but in specific ways, of course. But I think that kind of experience of realization of the self-discovery is one sphere that I called the affective, because it's a very personal, and the self-discovery is a thought that happens inside. And once you realize that we are different, we try to look for people like us. Like, we try to relate with people that are different also. And those relations and those encounters happen in physical space, in virtual spaces, in the school, in the street. And those, that category that I call the XXXXX, which is beyond sex, like 3X is porn, I guess, and 5X is beyond that. That's what I thought. It's about the recognition of yourself in the other. So it's not any. It's, you already know you're different, and you're now trying to find yourself in other people. And that's why these relations happen in physical, virtual, or other kind of spaces. And that in each city has a specific representation. So we can actually, each city can be mapped, and we can create this kind of network of X spaces, X queer spaces, or something like that. And once we the third stage is like, this is a very, of course, simple way of explaining this process, but I decided to do it this way. The third stage is like when you realize you're different, once you realize that, or you find people like you actually have a decision to be out or live your life publicly in a certain way. And that of course it's related to identity and how you present yourself, and that is related to the public space and the spaces of power where where we have the ability to express our identity. But most importantly, I think, is that this sphere I call the political, and it's political, of course, to be queer or to say that I'm gay here in Paris, but it's different to say it in Peru or to say it in Cambodia. And this is because then what do we share, queer people? We share that today, no matter where we are. So today is 19th of May 2022. The whole world, no, not the whole world. Today, that present moment, we share. But my present moment in Paris gives me a certain kind of rights as a gay person that my rights as a gay person in Peru or my rights as a gay person in Cambodia. So even though we share the moment that today, actually our bodies have different kinds of rights, different kinds of aggressions maybe. So, and I think this sphere, if this is of course a diagram to explain this experience, but also it's a tool to analyze cities. So this third sphere focuses on the public spaces where political fight has happened, for example, in order for each city or each country to have the rights that they have in relation to LGBTIQ+ people. And also the spaces where the decisions were made in order to have our rights. And beyond that, it explores memory, actually, of the cities. So this is the theory I developed, and this one I use to approach cities, but also my own experience. As I said, the affective sphere is a very personal experience that happens inside. And I wonder, the reason why we realize we are different is because the representations of society that we see are not recognizable for us. So I think this sphere focuses on the analysis of representations of society that made us actually question or realize that we are not represented. And of course, each city has its own representations that could be explored. In my case, I relate to this kind of, in response to this unrepresentation that I felt, I guess, or people feel, queer people feel, we kind of create some kind of, I call it, yeah, I think it's like we create a house doll in our minds, like moments, objects, memories that we actually attach somehow, you know, in my memory or in my dollhouse, probably Britney Spears and all of these things I collected when I was a kid, 7-year-old in Peru, and I realized I was different. So I think we all create this kind of dollhouse in our minds, but a dollhouse is actually like an architectural toy that tells or expresses how people should live in a very specific way, or should, yeah, it's like kind of a, how do you call it? Doctrine. It's a doctrine. Yeah, you know, you understand, right? A toy to indoctrinate kids, kind of. So the X sphere is, as I said, this sphere where relations happen, or the possibility for a community is possible, and that can be, you know, queer or gay can be added as an adjective to any kind of noun. So we can actually queer up everything, I guess. And even like queer, for me, this sphere is more about performances, because the difference between a queer bar, let's say, and a sports bar, it's not like the chairs are different, it's not like the bar is really different. There is a backstage that might be different, but let's say the main space, it's not really so different. What is different is the way people act, so the performances that people do there, and also some symbols such as rainbows or whatever, you know. But I found more important this kind of performatic aspect of this sphere that makes any kind of space, such as a movie theater or a hall in a hotel, queer. And the political sphere, we've shared the present time, but this time is the conclusion of all of the events that happened before. And all of these events are not only don't only have an impact in the space where they happened, but actually have a repercussion in the whole world. And then you can have like big events, such as in big cities like Berlin, San Francisco, New York, that have created a wave of other kind of social movements that allowed other communities or other countries to go also in that direction. Yeah. Okay. I'm just going to show a little thing I did on how I use this theory in Berlin. And it's all based on metaphors, actually. So in Berlin, this affective sphere, which is a hidden emotion or a hidden process, but affects my whole person, or being queer actually is a realization, but affects your whole life. And what I wonder, what is a common or an element of Berlin that actually is not so noticeable, but affects the whole city, or the whole landscape even. It's the groundwater that comes from the glaciation, and because in Berlin it's so close to the surface, affects how buildings are built, it affects the size of the buildings, and also it creates this kind of network of pipes that actually take out water from construction sites and take it to the canals or the rivers. For the X sphere, I analyzed this El Dorado, which was a queer bar in the beginning of 1900s, even before, and it had 7 different locations with the same name, but because people knew what El Dorado was, it was a queer bar where transvestites and where queer people were accepted and welcomed. But now of course, after the war, it was occupied by the Nazis and it was closed. But now the same building, actually, the pictures are from the same building in Berlin, in Schöneberg. But now it's like a bio market shop, which is actually a representation of like a gentrified neighborhood, which now is Schöneberg. And then the political sphere, which I said is about memory and in relation, of course, to all of the events that happened. How can that be represented in architecture? And also, again, I started to comparing, for example, all of these plans that existed in Berlin for 60 years, I think, and I started to overpose them. And actually, this idea of precision came back again because none of these maps actually are coincidence. They all have some kind of variation. And in relation to memory, I'm not saying that this building, for example, the Palacium, a housing project, modernist housing project, postmodernist housing project, is queer, but this relation with memory, because this is a Nazi bunker that was not able to be demolished, but how this building was built around it and included kind of into the design of the building itself, I found it in relation to this idea of memory and trace of trauma. Some works I've done in the last year. I tried to use this theory that I created of the three spheres to approach my architectural and artistic practice, I guess, and as a researcher too. Again, the little theory. So queer world, yes. So this tool actually is, it can be applied to any city. I applied it in Berlin. Now I'm working in Brussels and trying to create some projects and research as in the framework of a course at KU Leuven, in the Faculty of Architecture in KU Leuven in Brussels, using this to, with architectural students, analyze the city and see what it comes out. And I've been able to do a lecture and a workshop in Pristina. So I guess, and in Lima, I also wrote, I did some analysis. So until now, Queer World has expanded into 4 cities, I guess. And actually, last year, the project was selected as one of the projects for the Future Architecture Platform. That's where John and I met. And through this selection, I was able to collaborate with different institutions of architecture in Europe. And I also did a performance in the Urban Summer Festival of Architecture in Brussels. And it was always researching about common memories of queer people in... we live in Brussels, but I'm from Peru, and the 2 performers, one of them is from Brazil and the other one is from Morocco. And for me, this opportunity to create a performance in the public space in Mont des Arts, which is a very central public space in Brussels, was important to reflect on our memories and to explain, or at least try to say that I think progression of society questions everything that has happened before. So now we are questioning the power structures that we live nowadays. But also as a game, I decided to do this performance, like revisit this kind of game of a musical chair and try to walk around and try to see how can we queer this little kids game. And that's what we did. And with, I don't think there's much more to say about this. But through that connection, actually, both of the dancers were Vogue performers, and we were able to make connection also with some guy I met at a theater in Brussels to create a safe space for people to do voguing or to learn about voguing in Brussels. and we did these Vogue open practices that before they were doing in the train stations in Brussels, metro stations, and I found it really cool also, but now we have like sometimes metro stations and sometimes this theater. Then through also Future Architecture platform, I was asked to develop a short movie about Brussels through my research. And that's what I started questioning, what do I really care, or what do I'm interested in Brussels to research in relation to my topic. And you know, when I came 4 years ago, I thought, okay, it's Europe, I can kiss my boyfriend in the bus stop, but actually no, because I live around here, which is, it's an okay neighborhood, I guess, but I cannot really be so, what do you say, expressive with my boyfriend in the public space. But if I go to like the center, somewhere in the center, or the other side, which is like Ixelles or Saint-Gilles, which are more open or international neighborhoods, there is okay to hold hands or to kiss to my boyfriend. So for me, the difference between these neighborhoods was good, interesting to show in this movie. And what I did was actually, the movie is a walk between these two neighborhoods, Molenbeek and Ixelles. Molenbeek is actually where I work, and Ixelles is where I usually go out with. But yeah, the short movie is only 13 minutes, and it's queer experiences in 5 different spaces of Brussels. And now, yes, the last part is this research I'm developing in Brussels called Queer World Brussels. I was able to get a grant in order to develop my research, and I decided to, because through this grant I was gonna teach at KU Leuven in the Faculty of Architecture, and this idea of queerness is actually now being explored a lot between architects. So I decided to create this series of lectures of feminist and queer collectives to explain or to start researching what actually is a queer approximation, queer approach in architecture and urban design. That's how the other practices series of lectures was organized. And then in the work of the class, there is only one queer people and the rest is not. But they are very open and always committed to the research, and I found it really, really nice. And we decided to collaborate with a collective called Queers in the City, I guess. No, Queers in Space, sorry. To open the research that we were developing in school and open it in a public event in a bar in Brussels so people can actually collaborate. And that event was actually last Sunday, and it was called Queers and the City. We made an open call for projects of interviews and video, and we presented 6 people that were presenting their research in the context of the World Queer Project. And I used again these queer spheres in order to organize the event of Sunday. We created this timeline, we did a map, and the affective sphere was a series of interviews, photography and interviews. The X sphere was a map of Brussels. We called it like queer energy. And the political sphere was actually a timeline of all the political events in Belgium that were queer, but also trying to find the spaces where they happened. So it was like a spatial research in time, I guess. And we decided to make them public, so actually people can also collaborate in the creation of the timeline, for example. So the information we got to make the timeline was public information we got in books, also with some collectives or some archives. But there's so much knowledge from queer people that have lived in Brussels for so many years that we also want to include that into this timeline and into this map. Yeah. And that's it. Thank you.